Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Cara.
Today's episode covers ground that we get asked about pretty constantly, which has to do with the world of gaming. And it's a topic that we've taken on in little bits and pieces along the way, but we've never tackled head on, quite frankly, because I think this is the first time we've come across a resource and a person who is doing it in a way that just resonated. Here are the myriad of questions we get. Is gaming healthy? How old should my kid be before I let them on games? What is an appropriate time limit for gaming? How do I handle when my kid's mood shifts while they're gaming? I'm fine with my kid being on games, but it is impossible to get my kid off games. All the way up to gaming is ruining my kid's life. Gaming is destroying my kid's grades. My kid has lost all motivation to do anything outside of just show up at school and then get back onto a gaming console because it feels so addictive. I don't know who these strangers are that my kid is gaming with. I've heard that you can get to porn on gaming. I've heard that there's all this, destructive stuff that happens, bullying and all sorts of stuff like that on gaming servers like Discord. So I could go on for another 10 minutes with the variety that we get. And I think for the first time, we found someone who answers it all.
Our guest, Dr. Alok Kanojia, is a fascinating person. So he's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist. He's a lifelong gamer, a recovered gaming addict, and the co-founder of a company called Healthy Gamer, which helps gamers find balance. And it uses his expertise in psychiatry to help people live, full, rich lives while understanding the impact of gaming on them and their lives. And he just approaches all of this with so much, first of all, so much science and so much understanding of the brain, but also without judgment and without shame, which is obviously how we like to approach things. And I think it's going to be not only helpful to people who are struggling with this issue, but also reassuring that there is a path forward and that kids can have a relationship to gaming and not have it take over their lives. And finally, if you have a kid for whom it is taking over their lives, to understand what might be going on and how do you approach it and how do you talk about it with a kid. So we think this is fabulous. We can't wait for you to hear it and provide us feedback. Hi, Alok.
Hey, Vanessa, how are you?
Good. We're so happy to have you.
It's awesome to be here.
We are giddy with excitement for this interview, partially because it's a topic we haven't covered in depth, right? So the conversation is about raising a healthy gamer, which to some people may seem like an oxymoron, but you're going to talk about how that's possible. Partially, we're giddy because some of us may be having these very conversations in our own homes with our own children and have been navigating this path for a while and are super grateful to your insight, knowledge, and guidance. And partially because you write about brain science in a way that is so accessible and so fantastic. And we have no doubt that our audience is going to love it. So can we start, because, you do have a good story.
That ends with the line, within 8 years of flunking out of college, I would become a professor of Harvard Medical School. So, can you tell us?
So, it's interesting. So I grew up playing a lot of video games. And I was like one of these like kind of gifted kids, but then I didn't really develop any study habits. And once I hit high school and college, I really started to struggle. So I was on academic probation my first year of college, basically failed out after my second year of getting like C's, D's, and F's. And my parents were like quite knowledgeable. They're both doctors. So they understood some stuff about like addiction and like they understand how to work hard and all that good stuff. So I had a very like healthy upbringing. But my parents were just outgunned. Like, I don't think they were prepared. Even today, a lot of parents aren't prepared for like how addictive technology really is. And so even in terms of like why I wrote How to Raise a Healthy Gamer, I think a big part of it was like recognizing what my parents needed to know to raise a child like me. And if you're a parent who's got a kid who is gifted or is even neurodiverse and is like getting into a lot of technology, like to really understand that there are billion-dollar companies that are trying to what they call increase engagement with your child. And so what we really tried to do is I tried to think about what did my parents need to know? And they didn't know what to do. So they tried tough love. They tried being really kind and emotionally supportive and things like that. And so finally, my dad was like, nothing is working. Like, this is not working. And I agreed with him because we'd been like kind of fighting for a couple of years. And so he's like, you got to go to India. So I was like, what am I going to do there? And he's like, I don't know, but that's the only thing that's left. 2 weeks after finishing my second year of college with like less than a 2.0 GPA, I hopped a plane and went to a remote part of India where I stayed in an ashram, which is like a monastery, for about 3 months. Completely fell in love with like meditation and yoga. So what I really discovered was that I was really frustrated because I myself didn't know how I worked. I didn't understand, like, I know that I should go to Spanish class in the morning. Like, I know I shouldn't be skipping school. I know that I just have to like work for like, I just have to show up at class for like 2 hours a day and then I won't fail. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So what I discovered in India was a way to understand my own desires, like what's going on within me. So decided to become a monk and then pursued that for about 7 years. My teachers were really wise. They said, I tried to take my vows at the age of 21 and they were super smart. They said, taking your vows is about giving up your life, but you don't have anything worth giving up. So you need to go and like get something worth something and then give it up. So they told me to go back to the United States, get a doctoral degree, get to the age of 30. And then if I want to give things up, they'll take me.
I think we can just stop there for a second and say that's one of the better pieces of parenting advice that anyone could ever give. I mean, it's amazing.
That is really fascinating. And I'm like, okay, can I get my kids a flight to India sometime soon?
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. Like, I think it's super cool what I learned there. And then ended up meeting my wife. So the whole monk thing did not work out. My teachers were incredibly wise, right? So they sort of understood that at 21, I didn't really know what it was to give up things like love and a relationship. So like, if you really want to, go do all that stuff and then give it up. So then I went to med school and then started at Tufts in 2010. And then I did my psychiatry training at Harvard and Mass General and McLean Hospital starting in 2014. And so was faculty there for a few years. And then while I was there, I asked actually like my mentors, who are just absolute brilliant people, leaders in the field of psychiatry, about technology addiction. And this was like back in 2015. And they sort of acknowledged that it's a problem, but people weren't really doing much about it. And that's when I sort of realized, like, I had one psychoanalytic supervisor and I asked her, I was like, she's just a very competent psychoanalyst, like 70 years old, brilliant, in practice for 50 years. And I asked her, why do you think people get addicted to video games? And she said, well, I think it's the same reason people get tattoos. And I was really confused by that answer. And I was like, what do you mean? And then she went into this like deep psychoanalytic explanation of why people get tattoos and virtual identity. And I'm sure there's some merit to it, but that's when I realized the leaders in the field of psychiatry like have never played a video game. Like, they don't know what it's like to, interact with games. So I started working with gamers. And then I started streaming in 2019. So I started streaming on Twitch. We were the fastest growing stream on Twitch, which is really weird because we talked about gaming addiction on a gaming platform. So one of my mentors once called that, they were kind of like, so you're doing Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in a bar? And I was like, yes, actually, like that's actually the best place to have meetings where people have problems. And so that's really where Healthy Gamer was born. And we started to work with a lot of people who were at the beginning predominantly young men, helping them develop healthy relationships with technology, video games, pornography. And then what started happening is parents started reaching out to us. So they ended up finding us on YouTube or Twitch, and they were like, can you help my son? Can you help my daughter? And so then we started working with parents. And then eventually we got to this sort of paradigm where now we've done a couple of research studies on it. We have sort of this evidence-based approach to help parents reconnect with their kids, sort of teach them how to restrain technology use instead of restrict. So that's a big part of what we really want to do is like, we need to understand that as parents, our kids are going to encounter technology, and the technology is only going to be more addictive over time. So what we really need to do is prepare our children for an invasive and addicting technological world that they're going to inherit.
So can we talk about the term healthy gamer, which is, I think, a really important framing for what you're doing. And again, I'm going to read you back to you. And I apologize, I don't do this very often, but it's just really thoughtful wisdom in your book. You have this little part where you say, when video games are used for enjoyment, not escape, that makes for a healthy gamer. Using games to enable social connection, not isolation, that makes a healthy gamer. Using video games to replace social support or to shore up faltering self-confidence, that leads to unhealthy gamers. So a very simple statement for the deer in the headlights, parents, grandparents, trusted adults who have no idea even how to define what healthy and what unhealthy is. I feel like this sets up a very, very rational framework, right? You're having fun, you're not escaping, you're connecting, not isolating. That's healthy gaming. Am I missing anything there?
No, I mean, I think that's the crux of it, right? So if we look at video games, what happens is that games can do a lot for us. So they are a way that we can form relationships with people. So I started playing a video game with someone when I was 15 years old. And the first time I met them was at my wedding. And so 12 or 13 years later, I'm like, hey, bro, I'm getting married. And this person, we've been close for 13 years. We've never met each other. And then they came to my wedding and it was awesome. So the internet can be used to form connection. But then the challenge is that sometimes video games offer us an easier path that can become unhealthy. So since I can meet people online, if I'm not careful, my social skills will start to atrophy. I'll start avoiding people in real life. And so it can be used as recreation or escape. It can be used to foster connection or breed social isolation. And if we look at any kind of addiction, right? So even if we take something as simple as alcohol by itself is not healthy or unhealthy. It is entirely our relationship with it. Is it a way to relax and form bonds? There's some studies that show that 2 drinks a week are good for your mental health. Or is it used as a crutch to help me manage my negative emotions, help me numb myself, which is another thing that video games do, is that they tend to shut off or suppress our negative emotional circuitry. And that was something that I felt very, very acutely, because what was happening in college, I still remember this very clearly, is that I knew I was screwing up my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way I could manage those feelings was by playing video games. And the more that I managed those feelings through video games, the more I screwed up my life. And then the more I needed more video games to help me tolerate, I'm screwing up.
So let's talk for a second about the concept of addiction in the context of gaming, because you make a great point, which is yes, there's a lot of debate in the mental health community about whether gaming can be an addiction the way a substance use disorder can be an addiction. But you're ultimately, does it matter if it's technically an addiction or not, if it's interfering with everyday life, with, and the way you describe the impact of gaming as sort of pausing or halting a kid's or a person's development at this very stage at which they become dependent on it, is the same thing that addiction specialists, substance use disorder specialists talk about, the halting of maturation amongst people, that they are essentially halted at the age at which they begin to use and depend on these substances. How do we understand addiction, Alok, and how do we parse? And we're going to get into the brain science in a second, because I think that really helps. But give us a framework. In our house, my husband and I throw around the you're so addicted. Are we being ridiculous? Can we use that terminology? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, it's such a great, beautiful, nuanced question. And I think technology is even requiring us to develop more sophisticated language around addiction. So let's start off with substance use versus behavioral addictions. And I know you said we'll get into the brain science, but like I'm going to go there now. If that's okay.
Here we are.
So the first thing to understand is that when we're looking at the definition of addiction, the technical definition. So the first thing is it's a behavior that we persist with that causes negative consequences, impairs our function in some significant way. And despite the fact that it is damaging us, we persist in the behavior. So a lot of our understanding of addiction is based off of substance use disorders. So when we think about addictive substances, right? So we will even say addictive substances. So we think about things like alcohol. But if you look at what alcohol does, a molecule of alcohol will travel to your brain and activate the GABA receptor. So if we look at substances like marijuana, we have these things called anandamide receptors, right, which are endogenous cannabinoid receptors. So we have this targeted biological molecule that activates a particular receptor. And wherever you see that receptor, you will see activity of the molecule. So I kind of think about substance use disorders as homing missiles for particular parts of our brain. Now, what's happening with video games and technology is that it used to be that technology just activated our dopaminergic circuit. So we're kind of playing this game, we get some dopamine. But now what's happening, if you look at things like video games, they're expanding in terms of which parts of our brain they access. So it used to be that I play a game. When I grew up, I was playing like Super Nintendo, which had no internet connectivity. The multiplayer is if my friend comes over, then we can play a maximum of 2 people because there's 2 controllers. Now there's a whole community aspect. There's a monetary aspect. So now, I'll have parents come to me and they say, I tell my kid he's playing too many video games, but he says he wants to be a YouTuber. He says he wants to go pro. He says he's going to make millions of dollars. I tell him, hey, you can't be playing so much. You need to focus on school so that you can get a good job. And he's like, this is my job. And now I don't know what to say. So what's happening with gaming is that it's having a more and more whole brain effect. It's affecting our sense of identity because now I have this virtual avatar. It gives me a sense of community. Super scary story I heard about, a young woman who up and left. I can go into more details if y'all want. I share the story in the book, but she was basically addicted to games. And then her brother was like, unless you get a job, you got to move in with mom and dad and they're not going to let you play games. And 2 weeks later, he shows up and there are people moving stuff out of his apartment. He's like, what's going on? It turns out her guildmates from World of Warcraft, whom none of them had ever met, had showed up. She told them what was going on. They drove down from Kansas to Texas, picked her up, and then she moved in with them in Kansas and was kind of never heard from again. Super wild situations. So we're seeing a community effect, a socialization effect. We're seeing an identity effect. It's not just dopamine. We're even seeing a sense of pride and enjoyment and mastery and achievement. So games are affecting so many different parts of our brain. And as they affect more of our brain, they can, in a sense, become more addictive because now the game is my primary source of my pride, primary source of my friends, maybe even potentially a primary source of my income. And so then it gets really, really tricky, right? Because we have this term workaholic. Is being a workaholic a true addiction? And so now what we're seeing is that when it comes to behavioral addictions, there are a couple of other things that are also different, which is that, if someone's addicted to shopping or addicted to sex, as a clinician, my goal is not to have them become an abstinent person who never buys anything, right? That's absurd. So with behavioral addictions, and this is also why we kind of lean into the idea of a healthy gamer, it's about discovering a balanced and healthy way to engage in this stuff.
But you also talk a lot about this notion of gaming as an escape, right? A way to damper the emotions. And that feels familiar in other addictions, but it's not exactly the same. Can you speak to that a little bit about what the escapism of gaming and that vicious cycle?
Yeah, so the escapism has this additional layer to it. So just to give you all an example. So if we look at, and this is more psychology than neuroscience. I don't know if we quite really even understand the neuroscience, but gaming is an escape for a couple of reasons. The first is that it absolutely does suppress our negative emotional circuitry. So if I'm feeling bad and I play a game, I will feel better or neutral.
Can you explain I know it's the neuroscience is hard, but you do get into some of the brain structures that are impacted by that phenomenon.
So what we know is that we have these brain structures called the amygdala and the limbic system, which is where we feel a lot of our primitive emotions. So things like anger, fear, some degree of shame and stuff like that is more of the broader limbic system. And so if you just literally think about it, right? So if I'm sitting there feeling ashamed about myself, and then I start to play a game, my mind gets occupied by the game. Mm-hmm. I'm no longer thinking about myself. So this is what's really interesting. Even if you look at some of the most rapid treatments, so the most rapid treatment we have for depression is actually ketamine. It's infusing someone with ketamine. And ketamine was originally designed as an anesthesia agent. So it's a dissociative agent that gets people to stop thinking about themselves. So in depression, what happens, if you really pay attention, we have this activation of something called the default mode network, which is our sense of identity. And someone who's depressed, they are constantly thinking about themselves. And now that may sound weird, but the kinds of thoughts they have are, I'm a burden to everyone. Everyone would be better off without me. I'm so bad at this. I suck at this. I'm ugly. But if you look at all of this, the thoughts they have start with I. Mm-hmm. Their mind is relentlessly beating them up. They have hyperactivation of the default mode network. And if we infuse someone with ketamine, we disable that network, the depression goes away. We also know that meditation disables the default mode network over time. So in gaming, what we've got these negative emotions that get suppressed. We also have suppression of the default mode network. And then we also have something very interesting, which is kind of new to gaming. Because if we think about the default mode network, and I don't like who I am in real life. Let's say I'm a 15-year-old kid. I'm a little bit overweight. I'm going through puberty. I've got acne. I don't know how to talk to girls. I'm a boy, right? And so I'm really awkward in the real world. And now in this video game, I get to be whoever I want. I can create a character. Companies will sell cosmetics for video games. And just like we have these very high priced purses or shoes or watches, there are now limited edition, highly coveted cosmetics that you can purchase in a game to make yourself look like something else. So it's not just negative emotional circuit. Yeah, it's crazy. Now we see what is really damaging about gaming. Yeah.
But to that point, just putting the general psychiatry hat on, it is a very typical phenomenon for adolescents to try on different personalities, right? Mm-hmm. This is a unique way in which kids can do it. And in many ways, it's a very safe and healthy way. Right? There are other ways it's not safe and healthy, but right, in general, if you're going to pierce, everything you can in your body in a game and not do it in real life and try that on, find me a parent who's not thrilled that it's a video avatar that's doing that before it's the human being that's doing that.
Well said, right? So you mentioned that this can be done in a safe and healthy way, or a unsafe and unhealthy way. I think the most interesting thing is that the most damaging thing is safe and unhealthy. So this is what's really interesting. Because when I do something in the virtual world, it feels safe because I'm protected. I can decide not to hang out with these people again. And so because of its safety, because it's virtual, because there's no consequences of what I say or what I do because no one knows who I am, it can actually become unhealthy. Right. So this is, it's crazy. But and this is kind of what happens is that since I like my virtual version so much more than my real life version. And this isn't just video games. We see this a lot with now filters and selfies, where the more I take pictures with selfies, I create a version of myself that I feel prouder of when I post it and it gets lots of likes. But then what I'm doing, even though it feels so much safer because I look my best version, right? And that's what everyone wants to do. What that creates is every time I look in the mirror, I'm a little bit more unhappy with myself.
It's so fascinating. One of the things I love about the book is how you explore the reality of adolescence. And obviously, that's our jam. So, but you write about this stage of feeling so awkward, so uncomfortable, maybe so unhappy in oneself and seeking an escape, seeking comfort, seeking, emotional safety or numbness or whatever it is. And I think that parents and caregivers don't appreciate how much kids are seeking a place to not feel the discomfort and the awkwardness and the unhappiness. Like, I think you raise a point that really demands our empathy, which is like, hey, do you want to go back to that age where you were like covered in whatever and your body was morphing every day and your friendships were changing from moment to moment? Like, ask any adult and they would say, no way in hell do I want to go back there. And so by bringing up this desire to kind of escape, it demands empathy from us towards kids and to say, and I would love to hear from you, besides healthy gaming, but also like, how are we in conversation with kids about the awkwardness, but also like, what are the things they can do in healthy ways, gaming or not gaming, that allow them some kind of escape or comfort? So like if an adult is watching their kid and all they want to do is be in the basement playing, Fortnite in the skins they've acquired and they feel totally awesome, but the parent is like, my kid is not, like, they are escaping. What does that conversation sound like?
Yeah, so I think we sort of realized working with parents that parents need like specific language is modeling. So we have a lot of sample dialogue in the book, but I'll walk y'all through that. Okay, so if your kid is escaping to the basement, a lot of parents' instinctive reaction is that this is unhealthy and it needs to change. And your instincts are not wrong; they're right. The problem is that if you try to get it to change, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. So it is unhealthy. If you believe that, chances are you're right as a parent. So what we sort of strongly recommend is, as you kind of said, like take a slightly more empathic approach and try to understand why, right? What is it about the basement that is so attractive to you? And what is it about sunlight that is so unattractive to you? And when you really ask that question, because the world that they're growing up in is different, right? The world is a very different place from what it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so kids are dealing with all kinds of challenges. So I remember like I got bullied a lot when I was in school, but then something cool happened is school ended. And then I went home and then I had a weekend where my bullies were nowhere near me. And even when I got bullied at school, it was mostly recess and lunchtime that I had to worry about because the other times the teachers are around. Now, I mean, there was someone who was charged, I think, with manslaughter for like the severity of online bullying that pushed someone to suicide. So kids live in a world now where they literally cannot escape their bullies. So what we strongly recommend is instead of saying to your kid, this is wrong, start by understanding their experience of an unhealthy behavior. What is it about this that pushes you towards it? Right? Why are you doing this? Don't use the word why because that's not very good, but help me understand what you like so much about playing Fortnite in the basement. Help me understand what you don't like about doing extracurricular things, what's going on at school, what's going on with your friends. Is it hard for you to make friends? Really try to just understand their experience of life, which I thought Vanessa did a great job of kind of articulating that we have to be a little bit more empathic.
One of the things you do throughout the book, especially in the second half, is pack it with conversation starters for every type of parent and every scenario. And you have these techniques that you offer, which I want to get into in a second, because the how to do it is really important. But something else that I deeply appreciated was your reality check on the timeline here, that parents and trusted adults, when they can see the problem, and let's face it, we don't always have the answers, but you can see this problem as the adult, right? Yes, the world has changed, but it's very clear when you've got a kid who's gaming too much or is on a path to gaming too much. The instinct is, especially for people who are tacticians, fix it and fix it now. Like, I just want to get this done. Now that I see it and it's clear to me, I just want to do it. And you're so realistic. I mean, the first thing you say before you even get into the techniques of how to be in conversation with a kid is, in the first 2 to 3 months, nothing's going to change. Really not that the first minor shift where the nose of the bow moves an inch is at the 2 to 3 month mark. And this sort of process of recovery, if you will, you're looking at 6 months to a year for the typical kid to be able to shift their behavior. And that expectation setting is critical, because we feel like failures when we identify a problem for our kid and then can't swoop in and help them fix it. And what you seem to be screaming from the rooftops is no one's failing here, but you really have to set a very long time horizon.
Yeah, so we are big fans of that long time horizon, and that's something that we've seen through our program. So we run a program for parents, and I think there are a couple of reasons why we sort of recommend going slow, and also a couple of reasons why it kind of works on that timeline. So what a lot of parents do is they're going to institute some really harsh limits, and they're going to be hard enforcers. The problem is that if you as a parent are the source of enforcement, the moment the enforcement disappears, the behavior can return. Unless the child is on board, it's not going to work long term. So what we've sort of noticed, and this is something I've learned the hard way, working in addiction psychiatry, is you can't be sober for someone else. Right. So anyone who has any kind of addiction, they have to want to have a healthier relationship. You can't force it. I've seen so many. I was, at a rehab for a couple of years, and people come in and they're on the brink of divorce, and that's why they're at rehab. But unless they can find the desire to become sober themselves, then it's not going to work. So the biggest challenge that a lot of parents face is that their child is against them. So you are trying to pull them kicking and screaming into a healthier relationship with technology where they are fighting you.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and ask a very specific question about that, which is, what do you advise parents who, when they recognize their child is against them, one parent holds strong and the other parent just can't tolerate it and moves over to the side of the child, if you will, before we get into sort of strategies when both parents are on the same page?
We have, I think, a chapter about that in the book with sample dialogues. So some of the communication techniques, which are sort of evidence-based techniques from motivational interviewing, which is a very good paradigm to treat addictions, we recommend actually using those techniques on the parent. So we've seen this a lot where one parent doesn't think it's a problem and one parent thinks it is. That's very, very common. So you have a non-unified front, you've got fractures in your discipline, and the technology will squeeze between those gaps and it'll not really work well. Then the kid has a preference for one parent. There's a good parent, there's a bad parent. So all kinds of negative things can come out of that. Second thing that we oftentimes, unfortunately, see quite a bit of is like divorced households or separated households, where limits are very strict over here and it's like free reign over there.
Yeah.
So that's why that's not going to work unless, and this is the crux of the book, is getting your child to want to reduce the limits. Because if they want to constrain their own technology usage, even if they are in a permissive household where there is one parent who's trying to weaponize the child, right? I'm going to be the best parent on the planet by giving them whatever video games they want so that they like me more. Your child will even be able to resist technology usage in those situations, but it has to come from them.
Okay, so now let's get into how you get from A to B. How do you get it to come from them?
So the first thing that a lot of parents don't realize is that most of their kids who have technology problems know they have technology problems. Mm-hmm. Now, this is very confusing for parents because parents will try to talk to them about it and the kid will be in denial. And you try to explain it to them. Hey, your grades are dipping. This is going on. You're not hanging out with your friends. How do you see this is not a problem? And the kids will say things like, oh, I'm a kid. It's my job to have fun. I'll figure it out later. I'll start dating when I go to college. I don't need to do that now. They'll resist so much. And so parents are surprised. They're like, I don't understand how they don't see how they have a problem. They do see they have a problem. The problem is that parents have created a dynamic where if your child admits they have a problem, they are giving the parent ammo to take the game away. So if I admit to you, if we're married and I say, yeah, I've got a drinking problem, you're like, great, let's get rid of all the alcohol. And then like that, the addictive part of me doesn't want to give it up. So what we really start with is creating a situation where for the first month, we're just going to talk to our kid. And you can even be upfront with them that nothing you say is going to affect what I do. In a couple months, I'm going to make changes to your technology usage. You can be a part of that process or you cannot be a part of that process. That's your choice. But for the first month, I want to understand. That's really my goal, is just understanding. And what we see in our community, and remember that the majority of people who come to us are the gamers themselves. And we have kids as young as 12 who will like watch our YouTube videos, which they're not designed for 12-year-olds, but and they know they have a problem. The problem is that they feel powerless.
Right.
So what we really want to start with is just open conversations about help me understand what you like about video games, what's good about games. Are there concerns that you have? What are things like at school? And then oftentimes what we can find through those discussions is something that the kid cares about. I don't feel happy with the way that my body is. Well, okay, let's think about what we can do about that, right? So, and I have a great kind of story from someone, who went through our program. So there was a dad who is a CEO, super like alpha type, right? So type A. And he was like, this is unacceptable and we need to do this, very harsh limit setter, very, very like outcome oriented. And after a couple of months of doing this, one day, so what they had sort of decided is his son was not happy with his appearance. So he let his son figure out, okay, what can we do about that? So son decided, I want to go to martial arts class. So it's going to give me confidence. I get bullied. I want to learn how to defend myself. So this comes from the kid, right? So they want to do that. And then we had a beautiful interaction. So the class is on Tuesday and Thursday. And so on Monday evening, dad goes to his son and says, hey, tomorrow is your class. You usually don't want to go. So tomorrow, the class is at 5:30. When 5 p.m. rolls around and it's time to drop you off, do you want me to force you to go? Or if you say tomorrow that you don't want to go, I'll let you not go. Kid sighs and he's like, I want you to force me. And then now you have the child's permission, right? This is a goal that your child has set. You tell me, you're in the driver's seat. I won't force you. And then Tuesday rolls around, he gets forced, right? He doesn't want to go. And he's like, okay, I'm going to force you because you told me to. And then it's not over then. Afterwards, parent asks the kid, 7:00, they're going home. He says, was it a good idea that I forced you? Or do you regret it? When Thursday rolls around, like, how do you feel about this? Was this the right move or the wrong move? Kid is like, yeah, thanks for forcing me. And like, that was the first time that I had ever heard a child thank a parent for forcing them to do something that is healthy for them. It completely changes the dynamic once you understand your child and once they tell you what their goals are. Because I can guarantee you their goals are not playing video games for 16 hours a day. They have other goals. They have other aspirations. And once you can get them to articulate it, and then y'all craft a plan together. And this is the beautiful thing is it doesn't start with restrictions on gaming. It's not, if you're playing 12 hours a day, the goal isn't to get them down to 4. The goal is, okay, let's go to martial arts class 2 days a week. That's it, right? So we're reducing by 2 hours on 2 days a week. That's it. And then we're going to ask the kid, hey, how do you feel about that change? Would you rather play 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day and go to martial arts class? And the kid is like, I kind of like going to martial arts class. Like, this is good. I feel better about myself. Okay, what's next? And so we sort of think about not so much about restricting the gaming, but building a healthy gamer. What does it mean to be healthy?
I mean, you probably have people listening who are like 10 hours a day of gaming and like you're not cutting it back. But I just want people listening to know, yes, there may be kids spending that much time. There may be kids spending 2 hours gaming, but their personalities change when they've been on for a certain amount of time. I don't want to call them withdrawal symptoms because I think that's a technical term, but the come down from getting off gaming creates a really unpleasant scenario, or they insist on gaming before they do all the other stuff they have to do in the family, chores, homework, dinner preparation, and then it becomes a battle every single night. So I want listeners not to focus on the amount of time. What I want people to hear from Alok is these are ways to be in communication with kids. These are ways to build trust and relationships with kids. These are ways for kids not to be on the defensive because they feel ashamed or attacked, but rather, how do we do this together? How are we in this together? Even if in your own mind, you are screaming that you cannot believe that you are in the position to be dealing with this issue. And maybe if you're feeling your own guilt and your own shame for how you handled it, let go of it, because the goal is having your kid have a healthy relationship to this or anything else. And when you read the book, you'll see the guidance about how to have these conversations. It's about gaming and it's not about gaming. It's about any way that you're in communication with a kid in your life. I don't want to finish without addressing a particular issue you talk about, which is the susceptibility for males, for boys and young men, to porn and gaming and online social networking, and the sort of interplay of toxic masculine culture and all of that in relationship to these. Can you just give people a sense? I mean, they'll read the book, but I just want to have a sense of what is happening here, because it's a phenomenon that people remark on, but I think don't totally understand.
Yeah. So I think that there are gender-based specifics when it comes to technology addiction as a whole, and even video game addiction. So there's a group of researchers out of University of Toronto that actually does personality analysis. And if you're a parent and you look at the gaming market, you'll see that there's all kinds of games. There are games where you can be like a farmer and you can like grow and breed cute pets. And there are games where you're, fighting in a zombie apocalypse for survival. And so what we already know is that depending on your personality as a human being, there are certain kinds of games that you will gravitate towards. And boys will gravitate more towards competitive games. Girls will gravitate more towards social games. That's one very simple distinction. But I think there's a lot more to it. So we're also seeing a lot of intersectionality between neurodiversity and gaming. So boys are diagnosed with ADHD, I think 3 to 4 times as often as girls. The rates of autism in boys is way higher. So there's a lot of like intersectionality with neurodiversity, male gender, and gaming. A quick thing about that is that I don't know if y'all have ever experienced this thing where you're like completely focused and it feels really great, right? So like if we're like focused in reading a really good book or watching a TV show or even working, when we're sort of in that flow state, it feels really good. Having a distracted mind feels very bad. So a lot of boys, what their experience is, this was what my experience was, is when I was in school, like even if you're gifted, you're bored. And so the stuff can't really hold your attention. So what we see is that school really moves at the pace of the slowest kid, because especially in school now we have this sort of idea of leave no kid behind. And so the beautiful thing about a game for a lot of boys is it really engages their challenge. So the moment that I beat level 1, level 2 is waiting for me. It helps me stay focused because it's so engaging. It has me at the edge of my seat. That's what they really enjoy about it. It also gives them a chance to kind of be competitive, to develop a sense of mastery. There's a huge social component now, especially for boys. And then there are also like darker sides to this, where our young boys and men are like absolutely in crisis right now. So we have a society that tells them that they're privileged, which in some dimensions is absolutely true. But then oftentimes what happens is when boys struggle, they are not allowed to struggle. We say it's okay for boys to cry, right? A lot of boys and young men experience a world where they are not allowed to express emotions. There are certain emotions that are acceptable, like sadness. Nowadays, it's sort of okay for boys to cry, but there's actually like a fair amount of data that shows that if you cry as a boy, you're going to get bullied and things like that. So there's a lot of challenge that boys face, and games can absolutely be an escape for them. There are studies that show that if you are more sociopathic as a man and you play video games, it actually relieves a lot of stress and tension and can lead to like positive outcomes in the real world. So there's even like really darker sides of this where potentially playing violent video games reduces feelings of aggression, which is really shocking to a lot of people.
Alok, is there any data that tethers testosterone in particular to these feelings of wanting to be on platforms, in games, feelings of pleasure during gaming? Because it strikes me that it is so gendered in certain ways. In other ways, it's not. But like what you're describing, this phenomenon is not new. That the first to video games and the most frequent to video games tend to be boys.
So I don't know if it's testosterone specifically. So there's all kinds of data out there about things like testosterone. I recently even saw a study, for example, that like oxytocin in boys is increased when boys wrestle, right? So we normally think about oxytocin as like a bonding hormone where we're hugging. But if you're a dad, so dads will experience more more oxytocin when they like playfully threaten their kids, right? So like, I don't know about y'all, but I mean, I have two daughters and I like get them, I'll like kind of play attack. And that's actually our method of bonding. So there's absolutely gender-based differences. I don't know if it all ties to testosterone. So there are studies that show that higher levels of testosterone can lead to more aggressive behavior. But I think there's way too much kind of nuance there where I would say testosterone absolutely has to do with masculinity, but I don't know that it boils down to testosterone. I think a lot of this stuff is also socialized. So boys are, on the one hand, we punish them for feeling angry. And on the other hand, that's the only emotion that they can acceptably feel, which is what's really confusing for them. So anytime you watch a movie, I can guarantee you if there's a male protagonist and there's some kind of conflict, the male protagonist will get angry. And usually towards the end of the movie, when they're about to beat the big bad guy. So boys are sort of taught this diverse kind of confusing perspective of anger is okay, but also anger is not okay. So if I get bullied and I go to my male friends and I complain, what they advocate for is you should get pissed and fight back. So it's really confusing. And so what's going on with boys especially is like, because all this emotional stuff is going on, games become a huge escape for them. They become a way to manage some of these negative emotions, suppress some of these negative emotions, things that they don't feel good about in the real world, that they can't articulate, that they don't even know how to articulate. And there's evidence that shows that higher levels of estrogen correlate with being able to verbalize your internal emotional experience. So we kind of see this even within menstrual cycles. So since boys have lower estrogen, there's a correlation between estrogen and something called, or there's something called normative male alexithymia, which is that it's normative because it happens to all men. And we're alexithymic, which means we don't know how to articulate our emotions. We don't even know what we're feeling. So if you talk to boys and men about how does that make you feel, they're like, I don't know. I feel frustrated. I feel pissed. It's annoying. They don't have a whole lot of like nuance to their emotional experience. And enter something that just manages all that stuff for you, right? Just makes it all go away. And as long as I'm playing a video game, I don't have to deal with these really confusing feelings. I don't know if I should express my anger, if I shouldn't express my anger. I don't know if it's safe to cry. I don't know if it's unsafe to cry. I have a great idea. I'm just going to play a video game for a couple hours and not worry about any of that crap. A lot of times we don't allow them to feel angry. And so one of the dangerous things about the internet is I think it's this emotion of feeling angry and being punished for it that really leads to a lot of toxic masculinity. So since I'm being punished, the only thing that I've been socialized to feel is anger and frustration. And anytime I have a conflict, the only thing my brain knows how to do is feel angry. We get ostracized by society, and then these angry men coalesce on the internet. And they create this echo chamber that becomes very, very toxic towards women. And that's absolutely unhealthy. It's toxic towards men too. And so we see that there's a lot of intersectionality between toxic masculinity, incels, if y'all are familiar with incels, and like gaming culture. And that's because these people have an atrophy of social skills because they're online all day. They don't know how to connect with other people. They have a bunch of anger which gets suppressed. When they stop playing video games, the anger comes out. When the anger comes out, we ostracize them. Sometimes that ostracization is very justified because the anger can come with toxic behaviors, can come with hurting other people. We have a lot of stuff around like, deep fake pornography and things like that, just a lot of malice. So you have this like crowd of angry incel gamers on the internet. And then your kid can join these people. And it's crazy to think about, but like when I go to the playground and I have, let's say, a 10-year-old boy, I see who they play with. When your 10-year-old boy logs onto the internet and has headphones on, they could be talking to a 33-year-old man who's like living in the basement, hates women, and is incredibly toxic. And they're playing games together. And it's crazy. So the world that we live in, like the idea of like a 33-year-old unemployed man showing up at the playground and playing with your kids for 6 hours a day, no parent would allow this. This is what the internet allows. And so the rules have completely changed. And as parents, we have to adapt in a way that we've never had to adapt before.
And they're implementable strategies that you offer about like kids shouldn't be on headphones while they're gaming. The volume should be on so you can hear the discourse, or that there's no way to communicate verbally with the other
Yeah.
people they're gaming with, that if they're on a screen, the screen can be viewed by the other people in the household, right? They're not down in the basement. You even recommend maybe playing with them, or at least sitting with them while they play, which I've done and is hilarious. But I will say I have seen over the years, because I have a bunch of boys and they have a bunch of friends, and there's a variety of gaming. There's an unfettered release of emotion that I do see amongst boys while they play. And it's hilarious. And it's anger, it's joy, it's triumph, it's disappointment, it's all of those things. And so I think it is also possible for healthy gaming to allow for that expression as well. It's something we don't think or talk a lot about, but it is the flip side of the larger conversation we've been having.
You beautifully said. I think that's really the crux of it, right? Is that this is a tool just like anything else. We have nuclear energy, which can be used to build bombs or power plants. So we have video games, which can be used by friends to express a variety of emotions. I play them with my kids, right? We can even form like international bonds. It's pretty cool because esports is like super global.
Right.
And it's just a tool. And I think the real challenge is for parents to sort of understand how gaming affects the brains and psychology of your children.
That's right.
And really learn how to adapt to this modern day where your kids aren't as good at communicating, even compared to you when you were a kid. So it's so challenging. And if we equip parents, I think the only reason that it feels like this is unwinnable for a lot of parents is because we haven't really been fighting in a concerted way. It's a lot of parents who are working individually, not understanding what's going on in the brain, not understanding what works. And so by sort of pooling resources and really helping each other out as parents, we really hope that y'all can all raise healthy gamers.
I mean, I think it's the perfect place to land, which is it's not just the reality, it's an understandable reality. There's very clear science and biology to explain why kids behave the way they behave. Forget kids, people behave the way they behave. Gaming is a phenomenon that impacts people of all ages. And we're kidding ourselves to even frame it as an adolescent issue. It's just that it gets in the way of adolescence differently than it gets in the way of adulthood. But it certainly can get in the way of both. But it can also, in moderation, like everything else, it can be a powerful force of pleasure and enjoyment and socialization and connection. And so for the adults who are still sitting here saying, how do I wrap my brain around where the kids in my lives are? Too much, too little, how am I going to set limits? How am I going to have conversations with them? It's all in your book in a very reasonable, rational, and frankly, implementable way. Just so long as the reader, the adult, says, I'm going to give this time.
This was so fantastic. We love learning from you. We will link to your YouTube channel, obviously to the book, and just super grateful to have you on and that you've put this really, really important and useful, all your work out into the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to be here. And I love the way that you guys even reframed what I was saying to sound even better. That was awesome. I think it was like super cool.
Alok, thank you for coming on. And I'm so excited to hear people's response to this episode.
Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure being here. It's great to talk with other professionals who have written amazing books about parenting and raising teenagers and stuff like that. So it's absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.